A quiet and dusty African village, surrounded by wide open lands and golden sunlight, there lived a strict and cold-hearted mother-in-law who ruled her household with an iron grip. Her small mud house stood at the edge of the village, where the wind carried whispers of stories from one home to another. People in the village knew her as a woman who valued tradition above all else, especially the belief that a family's pride and strength came only from having sons. When her son got married, the village celebrated with drums, dancing, and joy, welcoming the new bride into the family with hope and blessings. The young bride was kind, respectful, and full of dreams, hoping to build a loving home. But behind the smiles and celebrations, the mother-in-law had already formed a harsh judgment in her heart. She expected one thing and one thing only: a grandson. As days turned into months, her behavior toward her son's wife began to change. Her words grew colder, her eyes filled with silent disappointment, and her tone carried a hidden bitterness that everyone could feel but no one dared to question. The warm home that once echoed with happiness slowly turned into a place of tension and quiet helping. The young woman could sense that something was wrong, but she didn't yet know that her life in this house would soon become a test of patience, strength, and silent endurance. The reason behind the growing tension in the house was painfully simple, yet deeply unfair. The young wife had given birth to a baby girl. What should have been a moment of pure joy and celebration slowly turned into silence and disappointment, especially in the eyes of the mother-in-law. In the village, the birth of a child was usually welcomed with singing, laughter, and blessings from neighbors. But this time, the happiness felt incomplete. The old woman forced a faint smile, but inside, her heart was filled with dissatisfaction. She had dreamed of holding a grandson in her arms, someone she believed would carry the family name and pride forward. Instead, she saw the baby girl as a burden, something less valuable, something that did not meet her expectations. As days passed, her disappointment quietly turned into resentment. She began to treat her daughter-in-law differently, with cold looks and sharp words that slowly broke the warmth of the home. The young mother, however, held her baby close with love and care, seeing her as a beautiful blessing, not a mistake. She could not understand why something so pure and innocent could cause so much negativity. The gap between the two women grew wider with each passing day. The villagers noticed the change, but no one spoke openly. It was a belief deeply rooted in their traditions, where sons were often seen as symbols of strength and legacy. Yet, in the heart of the young mother, there was only love, a quiet strength that refused to see her child as anything less than a gift from God. The mother-in-law did not keep her disappointment hidden for long. Soon, her thoughts turned into words that echoed through the small house, sharp and painful like thorns. Whenever she looked at her daughter-in-law, her face would tighten with anger, and her voice would carry a harsh tone that made everyone uncomfortable. "I want a grandson, not girls," she would say again and again, as if repeating it could somehow change fate. Her words were not just complaints. They were heavy with blame, silently accusing the young woman for something she could never control. The house that once felt warm and welcoming slowly became filled with tension. Every small mistake of the young wife became a reason for criticism. If she was late with chores, she was reminded that she was already failing the family. If she stayed quiet, it was taken as guilt. The mother-in-law's words grew louder over time, no longer caring who heard them. Even neighbors passing by could sometimes catch pieces of her harsh glimmer carried by the wind. The young wife listened in silence, her heart breaking a little more each day. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but respect and fear held her back. In her culture, answering back to elders was seen as disrespect, no matter how unfair the situation was. So she endured it all quietly, holding her pain inside. Deep down, she wondered why her worth as a woman was being measured by something she had no control over. Yet, despite the hurtful words, she chose patience, hoping that one day, kindness and understanding would find their way into her home. The young wife chose silence, not because she was weak, but because she believed patience was her only shield. Each harsh word from her mother-in-law felt like a wound, yet she swallowed her pain and continued her daily life with quiet strength. From early morning until the sun disappeared behind the horizon, she worked tirelessly, cleaning the house, fetching water from the distant well, cooking meals, and taking care of her little daughter with endless love. Her hands were always busy, but her heart carried a weight that no one could see. Sometimes, when no one was watching, she would sit alone outside the small mud house, holding her child close to her chest. The soft breeze of the village would brush against her face as tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. She never cried loudly, never complained, because she didn't want to be seen as ungrateful or disobedient. Instead, she turned her pain into silent prayers, whispering to God for strength and peace. Even in the middle of cruelty, she chose kindness. When her mother-in-law spoke harshly, she responded with respect. When she was blamed unfairly, she lowered her gaze and stayed quiet. Many would have broken under such pressure, but she endured it with a calm dignity that made her stronger each day. Deep inside, she hoped that one day her patience would soften the hardened heart of her mother-in-law. She believed that goodness, no matter how small, never goes unseen. And so, she continued to suffer in silence, holding on to hope like a small light in the darkness. Every single day, the young wife carried a quiet hope deep within her heart, a hope that one day, peace would return to her home. Despite the harsh words, the cold looks, and the heavy silence that often filled the house, she never stopped praying. In the early hours of the morning, before the village fully woke up, she would sit in a small corner of the house, close her eyes, and whisper soft prayers to God. Her voice was gentle, almost trembling, as she asked for patience, strength, and a change in her situation. She did not pray for revenge or for her mother-in-law to suffer. Instead, she prayed for understanding, for love to grow where hatred had taken root. She believed that hearts could change, even the hardest ones, if touched by kindness and faith. This belief became her source of strength. Whenever she felt like breaking, she reminded herself that every hardship comes with a purpose, even if she could not see it yet. During the day, as she worked tirelessly around the house, her prayers stayed alive in her heart. With every step she took, every chore she completed, she silently repeated words of hope. She looked at her daughter and found comfort, seeing her as a reason to stay strong. To her, this child was not a burden but a blessing, a sign that God was still with her. Even when the environment around her remained cold and unforgiving, her faith created a small world of peace inside her. And she held on to that peace tightly, believing that one day, her prayers would be answered in ways she could never imagine. But no matter how much kindness the young wife showed, and no matter how deeply she prayed, the mother-in-law's heart remained unchanged. It was as if her feelings had turned to stone, untouched by love or compassion. Each passing day only seemed to make her more distant and more critical. Instead of noticing the hard work and quiet patience of her daughter-in-law, she focused only on what she believed was missing, a grandson. The old woman's expectations had blinded her. She could not see the innocence of the little girl who smiled brightly in her mother's arms. She could not feel the warmth that the young wife tried to bring into the home. To her, everything was overshadowed by disappointment. Even small moments of peace were quickly broken by her cold words or disapproving looks. Sometimes, she would sit outside the house, watching other families in the village. When she saw women celebrating the birth of baby boys, her heart would fill with jealousy and frustration. Instead of accepting her own family as it was, she compared it with others, allowing bitterness to grow stronger inside her. The young wife noticed all of this, yet she remained silent. She continued to serve, to respect, and to hope. But deep inside, she began to understand that not every heart changes quickly. Some hearts hold on to their beliefs so tightly that they push away even the love that surrounds them. The house, once full of hope, now felt heavier with each passing day. And still, the mother-in-law showed no sign of softness, as if she had built a wall around her heart that no kindness could break, at least, not yet. The villagers saw everything, even if no one spoke about it openly. In a small African village, nothing truly stayed hidden for long. People noticed the way the young wife walked with her head slightly lowered, her quiet eyes filled with unspoken pain. They heard the sharp tone of the mother-in-law echoing from the house, carried softly by the evening wind. They understood what was happening, but they chose silence over mshathelstva. In their world, traditions were strong, and certain beliefs were rarely questioned. Many believed that family matters should stay within the home, no matter how unfair they seemed. Others felt sympathy for the young woman, but feared creating conflict by speaking up. So instead, they watched from a distance, exchanging quiet glances and whispers among themselves. Some of the older women in the village even agreed with the mother-in-law's thinking. They too had grown up believing that sons were more valuable, that they carried the family name and strength. To them, the young wife's situation, though sad, was not unusual. It was simply part of life as they had always known it. But not everyone thought this way. A few kind hearts in the village felt a deep sense of injustice. They saw the love in the young mother's eyes when she held her daughter, and they knew that such love should never be looked down upon. Yet even they remained quiet, unsure of how to challenge a belief so deeply rooted in their culture. And so, the young woman continued to suffer in silence, not only within her home, but also within a community that saw her pain, but chose not to change it. As the seasons changed and time quietly moved forward, the young wife gave birth once again. The village midwife arrived early in the morning, and after hours of pain and struggle, the cries of a newborn filled the small mud house. It was another baby girl. While the sound of a child's first cry usually brought joy and celebration, this time the atmosphere felt heavy and uncertain. The young mother, exhausted but filled with love, held her newborn close, her eyes shining with warmth and care. To her, this child was just as precious as the first, a gift she embraced with all her heart. But outside that moment of pure love, the reaction was very different. The mother-in-law's face darkened with disappointment as soon as she heard the news. Her silence spoke louder than words. Instead of celebrating, she turned away, unable to hide her frustration. What should have been a joyful occasion became another reason for tension in the house. Days turned into months, and once again, the young wife became pregnant. Hope quietly lived inside her, not for herself, but for peace in her home. When the time came, she gave birth for the third time. And once again, it was a girl. 3 daughters, each beautiful, each innocent, each full of life. But with every birth, the gap between the mother-in-law and the young wife grew wider. The old woman's disappointment turned into anger, and her patience wore thin. To her, it felt like her expectations were being crushed again and again. Yet, the young mother never saw her daughters as a mistake. To her, they were her strength, her light, even in a home that refused to see their true worth. The mother-in-law's anger grew stronger with each passing day, like a fire that refused to die down. Every laugh, every smile from the young wife or her daughters felt like a provocation to her. She could not accept the reality she had been given. 3 daughters, all bright and innocent, all carrying life and hope. Instead of seeing the beauty and blessings in front of her, she focused only on what she believed was missing. Her mind was clouded with frustration, and her heart hardened even more. The old woman began criticizing the young wife openly, finding fault in the smallest things. If the house was not perfectly clean, it was negligence. If the food was slightly overcooked, it was a failure. Every word she spoke carried disappointment, and her sharp gaze seemed to weigh down on the daughters too. Even the neighbors noticed the tension. When they passed by, they saw the cold atmosphere that hung over the house, a heavy contrast to the vibrant life outside in the village. Inside, the young wife tried to stay strong. She continued to care for her children, her husband, and even the mother-in-law, despite the constant criticism. She reminded herself that anger cannot stop the sun from rising, nor can it diminish the love she felt for her daughters. Each day, she whispered prayers, hoping that one day the old woman's heart would soften and that her daughters would be accepted as the precious gifts they were. But for now, the house felt colder than ever. The mother-in-law's anger ruled like a shadow over their lives. Every smile was tentative, every step careful, because even a small mistake could spark her wrath. And yet, in the silence between words, the young wife held on to her quiet courage, refusing to let bitterness touch the innocence of her children. If you want, I can continue with line 10 expanded into 300 words next, so we can keep the full story in detailed, dramatic style for USA audience. One day, the mother-in-law's anger reached its peak. Her disappointment had turned into a storm that could no longer be contained. She stormed through the small house, her footsteps heavy on the clay floor, and her voice sharp like thunder. "If you cannot give me a grandson," she shouted, "then perhaps you do not belong in this house at all." Her words cut through the air, filling every corner with fear and tension. The young wife froze, clutching her youngest daughter close to her chest. She had faced harsh words before, but the threat of being thrown out of the house shook her deeply. Her heart raced, and tears threatened to spill, yet she did not respond with anger. She knew that any argument would only make things worse. Instead, she lowered her gaze, silently holding her breath, and tried to stay calm. Her mind raced with worry. Where would she go? How would she care for her children if she were sent away? But beneath her fear, a quiet strength began to grow. She realized that no matter what happened, she could not let the bitterness of others destroy her love for her daughters. The husband, watching helplessly, tried to intervene, but his words fell on deaf ears. The mother-in-law was determined, her pride and anger fueling her every movement. The house, once a place of simple family life, now felt like a battlefield. Every glance, every word, seemed loaded with judgment. Yet, even in that moment of fear and despair, the young wife whispered a prayer. She prayed not for revenge, not for anger, but for courage and for her family to survive the storm. Little did she know, fate had a twist in store, one that would teach the mother-in-law a lesson she could never forget. Meanwhile, far from the tension of the young wife's home, the mother-in-law's own daughter was beginning a new chapter in her life. She had recently married a kind and loving man from another part of the village. Their wedding was filled with vibrant colors, drumming, and joyous celebration, as the entire community came together to bless the couple. The mother-in-law watched the festivities with pride, secretly hoping that her daughter would fulfill all her expectations and bring her the joy she herself had been denied. Months passed, and the young bride settled into her new home, learning the routines and responsibilities that came with being a wife. She carried herself with grace, respecting her husband's family, and adapting to her new life with patience and warmth. The mother-in-law visited her occasionally, offering advice that was more critical than kind, yet her daughter obeyed respectfully. Life seemed peaceful from the outside, yet inside, the mother-in-law's expectations lingered like a shadow. Then came the day when her daughter became a mother. The news brought excitement and anticipation. Finally, the mother-in-law thought she would have a grandchild, a grandson, a boy to carry the family name. She imagined herself holding a little boy in her arms, passing on traditions and pride. Her heart swelled with hope and a sense of triumph. But as the days unfolded, reality proved unpredictable. The mother-in-law had no idea that life often writes its own story, far beyond what anyone can plan. The twists of fate were already in motion, quietly preparing a lesson in humility, understanding, and compassion. Little did she know, the very pain she had inflicted on her daughter-in-law would one day mirror itself in her own home. Soon, the mother-in-law's daughter became a mother herself. The small house of the young couple filled with joy and excitement, as neighbors and family members came to celebrate the newborn. There was laughter, music, and the smell of fresh food in the air. For the mother-in-law, this was a moment she had long awaited. She imagined herself as the proud grandmother, teaching the child, holding the baby, and feeling the love that she thought would finally belong to her. But fate had its own plan, quiet and unpredictable. When the child was born, it was not a boy, as she had secretly hoped and expected. It was a baby girl. At first, she could not believe it. She had pictured a little grandson carrying on the family legacy, someone to bring her pride and joy. But instead, in her arms was a delicate, beautiful baby girl with wide, curious eyes, tiny fingers, and a soft, gentle cry. The mother-in-law tried to smile, but inside, a wave of disappointment stirred. For the first time, she experienced the uncertainty and expectations that she had so often placed on her daughter-in-law. She remembered all the times she had demanded a grandson, scolded, or criticized. Now, the same feeling of frustration and helplessness touched her heart. The young mother, her daughter, looked at her grandmother with innocent trust, unaware of the storm inside her family. Yet, this small life, this baby girl, would become the mirror through which the mother-in-law would begin to see her past mistakes. Slowly, the lesson of empathy and understanding was beginning to take shape. But life, as it often does, had a lesson waiting quietly for the mother-in-law. Her daughter, whom she had watched grow with pride and expectation, had given birth again. This time, the anticipation was even stronger. She, too, dreamed secretly of a grandson, imagining the pride and legacy that would come with a boy. The mother-in-law imagined teaching him the family traditions, showing him the strength of their lineage, and finally feeling the satisfaction she had long desired. Yet fate quietly intervened. When the baby arrived, it was once again a girl. The cries of this new life echoed through the home, full of innocence and promise, but instead of joy, a wave of frustration and disbelief washed over the mother-in-law. She had expected what she had longed for, only to find that life does not always bend to our wishes. The tiny baby's delicate fingers, soft skin, and gentle eyes reminded her that she could not control the future, no matter how much she wanted. As she held her granddaughter in her arms, a strange mix of emotions filled her heart. Pride, love, and tenderness clashed with her old disappointment and expectations. For the first time, she felt a small echo of what her daughter-in-law had endured: the pressure of expectation, the judgment of others, and the frustration of society's narrow beliefs. Slowly, the weight of her past actions began to appear in her mind. The harsh words she had spoken, the tears she had caused, and the pain she had inflicted on her daughter-in-law were no longer distant memories. They were a reflection of her own experience now. Life had a way of teaching lessons through empathy, and she was beginning to feel it deeply. Now, the mother-in-law began to see the reflection of her own past in her daughter's life. Just as she had pressured her daughter-in-law to give birth to a boy, her daughter too faced the same expectations from her husband's family. The very words she had once spoken with anger and authority were now spoken to her daughter. "We need a boy," they said, just as she had said to her daughter-in-law. The mirror of life had turned back on her, showing her the pain she had caused others. It was a strange, humbling feeling. She watched quietly as her daughter tried to stay patient, her face soft with love, her hands gentle with care for her newborn daughter. The mother-in-law felt the weight of understanding pressing on her chest. For the first time, she realized how heavy words could be, how judgment could hurt, and how traditions sometimes suffocate love instead of nurturing it. The baby girl, innocent and unaware of the tensions around her, smiled with tiny eyes that sparkled like sunlight on the village dust. The mother-in-law felt a pang of emotion she had never expected: tenderness, regret, and a sudden desire to protect. She remembered the young wife, her daughter-in-law, who had endured the same pain quietly, never complaining, never losing her dignity. Slowly, a change began within her. The anger, the criticism, the pride that had blinded her for so many years, all started to soften. She began to see daughters as gifts, as blessings carrying life, love, and hope. For the first time, she understood that the value of a child is not determined by gender, but by the love, joy, and light they bring into a family. Now, the mother-in-law watched as her daughter faced the same judgments she had once placed on her daughter-in-law. The words, the looks, the subtle pressure to give birth to a boy, it all replayed like a painful memory before her eyes. She could see the frustration in her daughter's face, the quiet resilience as she tried to remain calm, and the weight of expectations pressing down on her young shoulders. Every glance, every word from the husband's family reminded her of the way she had treated her daughter-in-law years ago. The feeling was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. The mother-in-law had always believed that daughters were less valuable, that sons were the only true carriers of family pride. Yet now, she felt that same pressure on her own flesh and blood. The world she had tried to shape for her daughter seemed rigid and unfair, and she realized how cruel her judgments had been in the past. She remembered the tears she had ignored, the pain she had caused, and the quiet endurance she had demanded from her daughter-in-law. The mother-in-law began to see daughters in a new light. Her granddaughter, innocent and small, brought joy that no expectation could measure. Her own daughter's patience, love, and strength reflected the same courage she had once overlooked. Slowly, empathy started to replace the anger that had once ruled her heart. She felt the weight of her own mistakes and began to understand the true value of love over tradition, kindness over pride, and daughters over expectations. In that moment, a lesson unfolded before her eyes. Life has a way of teaching through reflection. Pain given to others often returns, not to punish, but to enlighten. She realized that daughters are not burdens. They are blessings, full of life, light, and hope, and she vowed silently to never forget this lesson again. For the first time in many years, the mother-in-law fell completely silent. The constant anger, the sharp criticism, the controlling words, all that had once filled her days, now seemed meaningless. She could no longer bring herself to speak harshly, not because someone forced her to stop, but because she finally understood the weight of her actions. Silence, she realized, was the only thing that could carry the lessons she had learned. She watched her daughter with quiet awe, noticing the same patience and love that her daughter-in-law had shown years ago. Every gentle touch, every soft word, every comforting gesture toward her own baby girl reminded her of the courage and resilience required to be a mother in a world that often judged unfairly. She began to see how much strength it takes to love unconditionally, even when others demand more than the heart can give. Even the small villagers who noticed the household tensions seemed to sense the change. The air that once felt heavy with anger now carried a subtle calm. The mother-in-law's quiet presence, no longer sharp and controlling, allowed the young mother to breathe freely. The girls played without fear of criticism, their laughter echoing through the small home. Inside, the mother-in-law's heart began to soften. She realized that no one should suffer because of expectations, gender, or tradition. Her own harsh judgments had caused pain, and now she felt the burden of responsibility. But for the first time, she also felt hope. Hope that love and understanding could replace anger. Hope that daughters could be celebrated as blessings rather than shortcomings. The silence was not empty. It was filled with reflection, growth, and the beginnings of empathy. In that stillness, she finally understood the value of compassion, patience, and the quiet power of daughters. For the first time, the mother-in-law truly saw the tears in her daughter-in-law's eyes, the same tears she had once caused. They were quiet, unspoken, and filled with a pain that no words could describe. In that instant, she realized the depth of suffering she had inflicted on another human being, someone who had loved and respected her despite every harsh word and cruel glance. The weight of her past actions pressed on her chest, heavy and undeniable. She remembered all the times she had scolded her daughter-in-law for not giving a grandson, the nights she had spent criticizing and judging, and the coldness she had shown when joy should have been celebrated. Those memories, which had once justified her anger, now filled her with regret. For the first time, she truly understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end of judgment and expectation. Looking at her daughter-in-law now, she noticed the same patience and quiet strength that had been required to endure her harshness. She saw how love had persevered despite pain, how dignity had been maintained even when it was tested daily. Tears filled her eyes as she watched, unable to speak, realizing that the woman she had once tormented had carried herself with more grace and courage than she could ever remember showing. In that moment, the mother-in-law's heart softened completely. She wanted to reach out, to apologize, to make amends for the years of hurt. She realized that empathy is born not from words alone, but from truly feeling another person's pain. Finally, she understood the lesson that life had been trying to teach her all along, that daughters are not burdens, and that love, patience, and understanding are far stronger than judgment or pride. The mother-in-law felt a change deep inside her heart, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to cause pain through words and actions. She looked at her daughter-in-law and saw the reflection of her own harshness, the same endurance and patience that she had once ignored. Those tears, once dismissed, now spoke to her soul. Each drop seemed to carry a message. This is how it feels to be judged unfairly, to be expected to give what you cannot control, to suffer in silence. Her heart, once hardened by pride and expectation, began to soften. A wave of empathy washed over her, a feeling she had never allowed herself to experience fully before. She realized that daughters, whom she had dismissed as lesser, were in fact gifts of life, love, and hope. They were innocent, beautiful, and full of potential, just like the little girls she now saw laughing and playing in her home. She remembered her own life, the years spent demanding what was not hers to demand, and the pain she had caused others along the way. Regret and understanding mingled together, creating a deep sense of humility. She felt a quiet determination rise within her, a desire to change, to heal, and to nurture rather than control. In that moment, she also began to see her daughter-in-law in a new light. The strength, patience, and unwavering love she had shown over the years were extraordinary. The mother-in-law understood that true strength is not in demanding or controlling, but in enduring hardships with grace and kindness. Her heart opened, and for the first time in many years, she felt the warmth of love that comes from understanding, forgiveness, and acceptance. Daughters were no longer a disappointment. They were a blessing, a reason to celebrate life. Her heart finally softened completely, like the first gentle rain after a long, harsh drought. The walls of pride and judgment that had surrounded her for so many years began to crumble, leaving a heart open to love and understanding. She realized that all the anger, the harsh words, and the endless expectations had only caused pain, not joy, not respect, not the pride she had imagined. Now, for the first time, she could see clearly. Daughters were blessings, not burdens. The mother-in-law looked at her grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter bright and full of life. She noticed the sparkle in their eyes, the way they moved with freedom, the innocent joy they carried into every corner of the home. Each smile reminded her of the preciousness of life, of the gift that she had failed to recognize for so many years. Tears filled her eyes as she realized how wrong she had been. She turned to her daughter-in-law, who had silently endured so much over the years. The woman's quiet strength, patience, and unwavering love had been a mirror to the mother-in-law's past behavior. For the first time, she wanted to reach out, to apologize, to show gratitude and respect. Words felt inadequate, yet her eyes spoke volumes, conveying sorrow, understanding, and a desire to make amends. In that moment, the household felt lighter, as if the heavy air of judgment and bitterness had been swept away. The mother-in-law's change of heart brought hope not only to her family, but to the small village that had witnessed her past harshness. She understood now that love is stronger than expectation, patience more powerful than judgment, and daughters more precious than she had ever imagined. From that day forward, her heart carried a new truth. Love, understanding, and forgiveness are the real legacy a family can pass on, far beyond gender or tradition. That day, everything changed. The mother-in-law finally understood the truth that life had been trying to teach her for years. Daughters are blessings, not burdens. As she looked at her grandchildren, the bright-eyed girls playing under the golden African sun, she felt a warmth in her heart she had never known before. Their laughter was not a reminder of what she lacked, but a celebration of life itself. Each little hand reaching for hers, each giggle, each shy smile reminded her that joy does not depend on gender. She turned to her daughter-in-law and saw the courage and patience that had carried the household through years of tension. She remembered all the tears, the quiet prayers, and the enduring love that had been offered to her despite the harshness she had shown. Guilt washed over her, but it was accompanied by understanding, empathy, and the desire to make amends. With a trembling voice, she whispered an apology, not just words, but a promise to love, to respect, and to support her family without expectation or judgment. The young wife, surprised but relieved, felt a shift in the household. The fear that had once shadowed every action melted away, replaced by hope, trust, and mutual respect. The daughters, unaware of the history behind the change, continued to play, their laughter now echoing through a home that had become warmer, brighter, and full of love. From that day forward, the mother-in-law embraced her daughters and granddaughters with genuine love. She understood that the worth of a child is never determined by gender, that blessings come in many forms, and that life often teaches its lessons in ways we cannot predict. She finally realized that the greatest gift a family can have is love, patient, unconditional, and unmeasured, and that daughters carry that gift in every smile, every step, and every heartbeat. The family, once divided by expectation, was now united in understanding, love, and joy. If you want, I can now create a viral title, description, hashtags, and tags for this full story in African style suitable for USA.